Oh, happy Monday. Happy Monday. I've had kind of a long day. I had a headache most of the day. It's been a crazy day, but preparing for tonight kind of helped me get through it. So maybe there'll be a couple of nuggets in here um, that you can find to help you. I sure hope that's the case. That's always been my desire, is to help others. So that, hey, Kimberly, hey, glad you could hop on. Hey, fellas, I was just talking about how it's been a long day and how preparing for tonight's little chat um, really helped me get through the day. Um, so we're going to talk about a couple of things about meekness and about another term that I just think is beautiful and that I just went when I discovered it. So I'll share that at the end. I already gave it away, but I'll talk about it at the end. Hope everybody's had a good day, had a nice weekend, crushed their Monday. Oh, let's go ahead and get started because I don't want to keep anybody too long, um, but I want to get through this, I think, interesting topic. So, for those who might not know me, I'm Mary Moss. I live in Richmond, Virginia. And in my dream life, an author, a poet, a writer, a storyteller, speaker. And I also, in my regular life, am a project administrator for a transportation project in Richmond. I don't work for the Department of Transportation, they're our client. And it's very interesting. So, so tonight I want to talk about meekness. And there are two scriptures that I kind of went to for tonight's little chat. And one of them is Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. I think everybody's heard it. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. That's it's called the Beatitudes, all the blessed verses that Jesus says. And that always puzzled me about what does that mean? What does that mean? I always thought of meek as being, like a kitten or something weak, not very strong, not very powerful. And I understand that, we're not supposed to be violent and aggressive and everything. We're supposed to be kind to other people. But it means so much more than that. And it's a word that I was struggling to define what I wanted to impart to people now that people are reaching out to me about achieving the first part of my dream of publishing my latest book. So it's been so wonderful for people. Oh, you're so inspirational. I admire you so much. Good for you. I'm so proud of you. And it's wonderful. And before I wrote the book, I would have just said, oh, thank you, and been very uncomfortable, but not believed or owned what people were saying because of a lack of self-esteem. But through the process of completing the book, I've started realizing that, hi Irene, that I do possess the qualities that people are attributing to me, not all the time, but in that one aspect of my life, I achieved a dream that was challenging to achieve. I did something hard. And so that is something that I can, kind of hold my head up about. But the motivation was not so accolades for me. The motivation was not so that I could say, look at me, look how great I am. And so I struggled with how to take the focus off of only something great that I did and talk about why I did it and what the purpose was for others while owning the task at hand. So that's probably rattling on. So let's just talk a little bit about the difference between meekness and humility. So meekness is an attribute of human nature and behavior. And I've got some notes because I don't want to mess it up. And it's been defined several different ways. Righteous, humble, teachable, patient under suffering. And meekness and humility are often confused with each other, used interchangeably or contrasted with each other. But humility refers to our attitude towards ourselves, whereas meekness is the state of restraining our own power to allow room for others. And that was my ambition, my goal, moving forward, was that yes, it's great. We do admire people who do things that we think are wonderful. I want people to be inspired to then go and be inspiring. To not let it stop with, you inspire me so much, I'm inspired to now go and inspire others. And I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense? This thing's giving me a message. There we go. I wanted to get rid of it. Anyway, so let's just talk a little bit more about the subject, about meekness. And so my goal is, I now call myself meek and not humble, because meekness is about a disposition towards other people. In Jesus's time, a meek person was one who was obedient to the will of God, who was courteous, patient, and slow to anger. Those are all things Jesus talked about. But most importantly, a meek person had self-control. And I was fascinated by this. There are only two people in the Bible attributed with meekness, and that's Jesus and Moses. So if you look at how Jesus was, he wasn't humble. He knew what he was about. But he knew that power and that the gifts he had, the gift of healing, it was for other people. And it was to allow other people to become the best version of themselves, if you really think about it, to be healed so that they could then go and heal others. And Moses, he wasn't a weakling. He had the power to crush Pharaoh and his army, but he chose instead to lead his people to the promised land out from under the oppression, because he was self-possessed enough to know that he was equipped to do it. Now, he argued with God at first. I think we all do, and we're like, what? You want me to do what? But ultimately he did it, and he understood that he was endowed with that, and that it was not for himself, that what he needed to do was it was obedience to what God wanted him to do. So it means power under control. I thought this was kind of interesting. The Greek word, I think it's pronounced pros, which maybe that's the same as prowess, a word that we have in the English language, but it was used to define, hey Heather, it was used to define a horse trained for battle. So think about that as it relates to Jesus in particular. Wild stallions were brought down from the mountains, and they were broken for riding. They were tamed. Some were used to pull wagons, some were used to plow fields, some were trained for racing, and some were taken into warfare. They retained that fierce spirit. They had their same courage and power and fearlessness, but they were disciplined to respond to the slightest nudge or pressure of the rider's leg. And they could gallop into battle at 35 miles an hour and come to a sliding stop at a word. They weren't frightened by arrows or spears or torches. They were said to be meeked. So no one tried to take their power away from them, but they restrained that power and controlled it and contained it. And I just think about us living that way for, living out. I was born to write. I know that. Before I could even write, I knew that I was to be doing something with words, and that I discovered early on that my words could move people and have an impact on them. And so I know that God gifted me in that way. That doesn't mean that that I'm conceited because I say, sometimes I am a good writer, because I don't claim all the credit for myself. I'm a good writer. I think this latest book had such an impact on people because I wrote it in obedience. It wasn't because I wanted to write it. I didn't want to go down that path again. I didn't want to take that journey, but I knew I had to. And so in that, I acquired my own meekness, and it feels really amazing. So, for centuries and centuries, this concept has been passed down, and how to train horses for whatever purpose, to not take the wildness out of them, not take the strength out of them, but to teach them to control it. That's the thing, to use our gifts the way that they're intended to be used. My coach John Eric always says our dreams are not for us, they're for the world. That's what meekness is about. It's knowing what we're about and what we're capable of, and then deploying that for others. I don't know. I just love the whole concept of it. And I love that word. And, being crazy writer that I am, I came on it, and I had to figure out why I couldn't find the word that I wanted. And I knew that humble was not the right word. So meekness is the word that I was looking for. The stallions become submissive, but not spineless. They embodied power under control and strength with forbearance. And, you think about some of those war horses. They weren't afraid. They charged right ahead. They never, stopped and hesitated. They never turned back. They went straight on into the battle. And a lot of times they, having the best horse was important, especially if you were a leader. You wanted horses that were going to be fierce warriors with their masters. Paul speaks about the meekness and gentleness of Christ, and he's describing it's a kind of obedience. He didn't suffer on the cross because he was a doormat. He did it because he knew he had to pay the price for all of us. He turned over tables too, so he was obviously, he had human anger, but meekness was the predominant quality that I would say in him. He knew he had the power to heal. He wasn't humble about that, but he was meek about it because he knew that the power of his touch could heal others. If he were humble, I think he would be afraid to use his power. And that's where the distinction is for me, between humility. I think of humility as maybe thinking of ourselves as not deserving or not being able to do what we're gifted to do. Meekness is knowing full well where our strength and power is, but not using it for our own gain, not using it to amass wealth, not using it, not using it to take advantage of other people. Because if you think about it, you look at a lot of these really wealthy people, famous wealthy people, they seem so sad. They seem so unsatisfied and so alone. And a lot of times the people that they are surrounded with are people who just want something from them. And so they don't really have, they seem like they have dominion over the whole earth, but they really don't. The ones who, what we have, those of us with meekness, we recognize that everything we have in our lives is through grace. And that we have what the earth provides for us, what God provides for us now in this life, but that in the next life, we'll have everything we could ever imagine. And, and perhaps the ones who don't seek that won't benefit from that. We don't know. It's not our place to judge others, but we can certainly live righteously, believing that in the next life, that's when we'll have our reward. I know. Barbara, thank you. So it's kind of interesting, right? It's not just me blathering on about this crazy concept. Like you and your jewelry. I mean, that's a gift. Your creativity's being deployed. You're making people happy, making them feel beautiful. And, if you didn't do that, I think that you're happier now at this point in your life doing that, happier about that than a lot of other things you've done in your life. I'm willing to bet that's true. And again, it's a meekness that you come up with designs and that you throw ideas out there for people and that you help people design the perfect piece. If you were humble, you wouldn't be able to offer them the beautiful pieces that you do. Yeah, she is. She's very talented. That's for sure. Yeah, so that's what and when someone is happy, I mean, genuinely really happy, you can tell. It just exudes from them, and your happiness is certainly contagious. And that doesn't mean that you don't have problems. We all have problems. That doesn't mean that you're a perfect person, although you're pretty close. It almost seems, I can't think of what the word is, like deceitful to say, that I have this ability and, yes, it's great that you admire me and I've done this difficult thing. Now you go, do something admirable in your own mind. Because, I mean, there are so many areas of my life that are not what I want them to be or where I want them to be. But in this one thing, I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and that gives me great joy. The other thing that meekness allows, like I said, today I had a really crazy day. My laptop died. I backed it up the last time 3 days before my book launch, which means everything I've done since then may or may not be saved. I don't know. The IS guy, the IT guy, was not reachable today. So as the day went on, I kept having to catch myself to not be anxious. I had to believe that everything was going to be restored. Can any of it be recreated? Yes. Do I want to do that? No, I do not. I absolutely do not. But I can if I have to. And, there's so much information that I'm just hoping that they're able to restore it. I'm believing that they will be able to. And I learned an important lesson in the process. But I noticed that I was not hysterical the way I would have been before. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is so terrible, this is catastrophic. I didn't freak out, I still use that term. I did kind of freak out, but not in the way that I would have in the past. Barbara, you and I have talked about how we know when we're doing something right because all these big obstacles are thrown in our way. And I just kept thinking about that conversation that we had, that it's okay. It's not the end of the world. The point was to get as many books as possible into as many people's hands. I still have all those addresses. If I can't get them off my computer, I will just have to go back and recreate the spreadsheet, try to recreate the notes. It's funny because each person that I interacted with, when I see their name, I can almost remember all the conversations I've had with them. It's really neat. It's been a really sacred experience to work with people in deploying these books and in them buying the books. So anyway, the meek shall inherit the earth, the people who are walking in the right way, the people who have the courage to do what they know they're supposed to do, and to know that they're doing it not for themselves and not of themselves. They're doing it for others, and it's, through divine power that we're able to do that. And the term that I came across in one of the writings about meekness and inheriting the earth in the next life is that we can live with a sacred optimism. I just think that is so neat. Sacred optimism. Not this pie in the sky, if we're holy enough, we're going to all go to heaven. Sacred optimism. We believe because we have faith. And that's what brought to mind Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. That's sacred optimism. And that's what we're lucky enough to have as meek followers of Jesus. And he was the best role model we could have had. So I'm really going to be focusing a lot on being as submissive to what God wants in as timely a manner as I can, and to continue to gently not push back, but when someone says, "Oh, I admire you so much," I'm going to try to remember to not just think, but actually say, "Thank you. I admire you too, and I hope you will, go out and change the world." Something along that line, because again, I want to turn the focus back on them and trust them with their own meekness to do what needs to be done in the world. So, well, I hope that was something interesting for people. I did kind of feel like I was rambling on and on because, like I said, it's almost an esoteric topic. But, oh, you're so welcome, Nancy. I felt really strongly about addressing this and coming up with just the right phrasing, to describe it. I'll post the scripture, Phyllis, so that people have them. And I'll post the phrase too, the sacred optimism. So I hope that you all will go into the rest of this week with meekness and strength and obedience and submission. That's a lot of things that you don't always think about going together. But I hope that's how your week is. And I'm confident I'm going to get every single file back. I have sacred optimism that every single file is going to be restored. And if it's not, that's okay too. I'll just have to do a lot of typing on my next trip to Florida to go back through Facebook Messenger and recapture all that information. Oh, you're welcome, Barbara. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great rest of the night and a great week. Stay safe if you're in the storm path as we are. And I will talk to you next Monday.